Elena Vasquez stared at her screen in the quiet control room orbiting Jupiter. The night shift was always boring, but tonight something strange appeared on her monitors. A signal came from deep space, weak and broken like a whisper in a storm. She had worked as a communications officer for 10 years and never saw anything like this. The signal jumped and flickered across different frequencies. Elena tried to clean it up with her computers, but the transmission kept breaking apart. She called her supervisor but got no answer. The signal was getting stronger now, and her translation program started. Working on it. After 2 hours of fighting with the computers, words began to form on her screen. Elena felt her blood turn cold as she read them. Please. Anyone listening? The hegemony comes for us. Die. Our children are dying. This is Kepler 442b. We have no hope left. Elena hit the emergency button that would wake up Captain Marcus Webb. Within minutes, Webb rushed into the control room, still putting on his uniform. He was a tall man with gray hair who had seen many battles in space. Webb looked at the screen, and his face became serious. How long has this been coming in? Webb asked Elena while studying the alien text on her monitors. Elena told him about the last 3 hours and how the signal kept getting clearer. Webb nodded and called for his best officers to come to the control room right away. More fragments of the message continued to arrive over the next few hours. The aliens calling themselves Rulani were begging for help from anyone who could hear them. They described ships in their sky that looked like metal mountains. These ships belonged to something called the Galactic Hegemony that wanted to kill every Rulani on their world. Dr. Robert Hayes arrived first and began working on the translation computers. He was the best language expert in the human fleet and could decode almost any alien communication. As he worked, more terrible details came through the signal. The hegemony had already destroyed 12 other worlds in the past month. They called it cleansing the galaxy of weak species. Captain, this is genocide, Dr. Hayes said quietly as he read the latest transmissions. These Rulani are peaceful water creatures who never built weapons. The hegemony considers them contamination that must be removed. Webb walked around the room, thinking hard about what to do. Earth had rules about not getting involved in alien wars. The human government wanted to stay hidden and safe from the dangerous powers in the galaxy. But these Rulani were innocent people being murdered for no reason except they refused to become slaves. Admiral Cross called Webb from Earth after hearing about the situation. She was the commander of all human space forces and a woman who never backed down from a fight. Marcus, what do you think we should do? She asked over the video connection. Admiral, these creatures are going to die if nobody helps them, Webb answered. The hegemony has massive fleets and they enjoy killing. If we do nothing, an entire species will be wiped out just because they wanted to stay free. Elena continued monitoring the signals from Kepler 442b, and the news got worse each hour. The Rulani described how hegemony ships were poisoning their oceans and burning their cities. Children were dying from toxic air while their parents could only watch helplessly. The aliens begged anyone listening to at least remember that the Rulani once existed. Admiral Cross made her decision. Marcus, I am authorizing the deployment of Battle Group Cerberus. Take our best ships and crews to Kepler 442b. These Rulani deserve a chance to live. Webb felt relief and fear at the same time. Battle Group Cerberus was humanity's most advanced deep space combat fleet with 30 of the deadliest ships ever built. But the hegemony controlled thousands of worlds and had fleets that could darken entire solar systems. Going to help the Rulani might mean the end of human secrecy in the galaxy. Within 6 hours, the human fleet began preparing for the longest journey they had ever attempted. Kepler 442b was over 400 light-years from Earth in a part of the galaxy humans had never explored. The crew loaded extra weapons, supplies, and medical equipment for the refugees they hoped to save. Captain Julie Parker commanded the flagship UES Defiance and came to see Webb before they left. She was young but had already proven herself in battles against space pirates. Sir, what do we know about hegemony tactics? She asked while reviewing the mission files. Webb showed her the intelligence reports they had gathered from captured alien databases. The hegemony used overwhelming numbers and massive ships to crush resistance quickly. They preferred to make examples of rebellious species by destroying them slowly and painfully. Fear was their greatest weapon against civilizations that might resist. They have never fought humans before, Julie Webb told her. They do not know that we come from a death world where everything tries to kill us. They do not know that humans never give up when protecting innocent people, the Rolani. Transmissions became more desperate as the human fleet prepared to jump to faster than light speed. The aliens described huge ships appearing in their sky like dark moons. These ships belonged to Overlord Vask, the most feared commander in the hegemony military, who had personally destroyed 50 worlds. Elena received one final message from the Rolani, as the human ships powered up their jump drives. To whoever hears this, please remember us. We were a people who loved art and music and our children. We never wanted to hurt anyone. If you are listening, do not come here. The darkness is too strong and we do not want others to die for us. Webb stood on the bridge of his command ship and looked out at the 30 vessels of Battle Group Cerberus. Each ship contained the most advanced weapons and shields that human science could build. The crews were volunteers who knew they might never see Earth again, but they also knew that somewhere in the galaxy, innocent people were dying and calling for help. All ships report ready for jump, came the voice of his navigator over the communication system. Webb took a deep breath and gave the order that would change human history forever. Execute jump to Kepler 442b. The stars stretched into lines of light as the human fleet entered faster than light travel. They were racing across the galaxy to save a species they had never met from an enemy they had never fought. Webb knew the odds were against them, but he also knew something the hegemony did not. Humans were very good at fighting impossible battles. As the ships traveled through the strange space between stars, long-range sensors detected something massive moving toward the Rolani homeworld. The readings showed over 200 hegemony ships approaching Kepler 442b from the opposite direction. Webb realized they were racing against time to reach the dying world before the aliens could complete their genocide. The countdown timer on his screen showed 18 hours until they reached the Kepler system. Webb hoped they would not be too late to save at least some of the Rolani. He also wondered if 30 human ships could possibly stand against a hegemony extermination fleet that outnumbered them 7-1. Elena continued monitoring alien communications during the long journey through hyperspace. The Rolani voices were getting weaker and more frightened as their world died around them. She promised herself that these innocent people would not die alone and forgotten. The humans were coming, and they would make the hegemony pay for every life they had destroyed. Admiral Diana Cross stood on the bridge of the UES Defiance as Battle Group Cerberus dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. She had taken command of the fleet during the journey and now stared at the horror waiting for them on her main screen. The planet that should have been blue and green like Earth was now a sickly yellow color with brown clouds swirling around it. "Captain Parker, what are your sensors showing?" Cross asked the young officer who had become her second in command. Parker worked at her station with shaking hands as she read the devastating reports. The hegemony had not just attacked the Rolani world, they had poisoned it completely. "Admiral, the atmosphere is full of toxic chemicals and the oceans are boiling," Parker said with horror in her voice. "They deployed atmospheric processors that are slowly cooking the entire planet. The Rolani cannot breathe their own air anymore." Cross felt anger building inside her as she watched the dying world on her screen. This was not war, it was torture on a planetary scale. The hegemony wanted the Rolani to suffer as much as possible before they died. It was cruelty beyond anything humans had ever imagined. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison ran onto the bridge with urgent news from his scout ships. Morrison was a tough soldier who had fought pirates in the outer colonies, but even he looked shocked by what he had found. "Admiral, we have refugee ships trying to escape the planet. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds." Cross ordered the fleet to move closer to the fleeing Rolani vessels. As they approached, she could see that the alien ships were nothing like human warships. They looked like giant seashells made of some kind of living coral with no weapons or shields. These were cargo haulers and civilian transports carrying the last survivors of an entire species. The largest refugee ship sent a communication request to the human fleet. Cross accepted the call and her screen filled with the image of an alien. Unlike anything she had ever seen, the creature looked like a cross between a dolphin and an octopus with large, intelligent eyes that showed both fear and hope. "My name is Keth," the alien said in translated speech that sounded like singing mixed with whale songs. "I am a scientist of the Rilani people. Are you the ones who answered our call for help?" "We are humans from Earth," Cross replied. "We came as fast as we could when we heard your distress signal." "How many of your people are still alive?" Keth closed his large eyes for a moment before answering. "Less than 1 million from a population of 3 billion. Most died in the first week when the hegemony released the poison clouds. Our children were the first to go because their smaller bodies could not fight the toxins." Cross felt her heart break as she listened to the alien describe the death of his world. She had seen war before, but never genocide on this scale. An entire civilization was being erased just because they refused to become slaves to the hegemony empire. Morrison prepared to lead rescue shuttles down to the planet's surface to look for more survivors. His team put on their best protective suits and loaded medical supplies for any Rilani they might find. Cross warned him that the atmosphere was deadly even to humans, but Morrison volunteered anyway. "Admiral, somebody has to go down there and see if anyone else needs help," Morrison said as he checked his weapons and equipment. "Those people are dying and we cannot just watch from up here." The shuttle mission to the planet's surface revealed horrors that would haunt the human crews forever. Morrison and his team found Rilani cities that were half underwater from the rising toxic seas. The beautiful coral buildings were melting from acid rain while the few surviving aliens hid in underground shelters. The Rilani they rescued were amazed to see creatures like humans who could walk on land and breathe the poisoned air without dying immediately. Morrison carried alien children in his arms to the shuttles while their parents wept with gratitude. These people had never seen anything as tough as a human from a Deathworld. Back on the fleet, Chief Intelligence Officer Nina Reeves worked to intercept hegemony communications. She was a former spy who could break into almost any alien computer system. What she discovered made the situation even more dangerous than they had imagined. "Admiral, the hegemony extermination fleet is not just large. It is commanded by their most experienced general," Reeves reported from her station. "Overlord Vask has personally overseen the destruction of 50 worlds. His ships carry planet killer weapons that can crack a world in half." Cross studied the tactical reports that showed over 200 hegemony ships moving toward their position. Each enemy vessel was larger than anything in the human fleet and carried enough firepower to destroy entire cities. The aliens had overwhelming advantages in size, numbers, and experience. Keth joined Cross on the bridge after his people were safely aboard the human ships. The Rilani scientist was amazed by human technology and the determination of the crew to help strangers they had never met. But he was also terrified of what would happen when the hegemony arrived. "Admiral Cross, you must take our children and leave this place," Keth pleaded with tears in his large eyes. "Overlord Vask shows no mercy to anyone who opposes the hegemony." "Your ships are brave, but you cannot fight his entire fleet." Cross looked at the alien refugee and made a decision that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "Keth, we did not come all this way just to run when things get dangerous. Your people called for help, and we answered. We are not leaving until every Rilani who wants to live is safe." The other human officers on the bridge nodded in agreement. Even though they knew the odds were hopeless, Captain Parker began coordinating with the other ships to prepare defensive positions. Morrison organized the rescue operations to get more survivors off the dying planet. Reeves continued monitoring enemy communications to track the approaching fleet. As they worked, Keth told them more about the hegemony and their methods of conquest. The aliens did not just want to rule the galaxy, they wanted to own it completely. Any species that would not submit was considered contamination that had to be cleansed. They had been destroying worlds for over 1,000 years and had never been stopped. They believe they are the perfect form of life and all others are mistakes, Keth explained. Overlord Vask thinks causing pain makes him powerful. He will torture your people just to prove that resistance is useless. Cross felt her anger grow as she listened to the alien describe the hegemony philosophy. These creatures were not just conquerors, they were bullies who enjoyed hurting others. They had never faced opponents who fought back with the fury of protecting innocent people. Long-range sensors began detecting the edge of the hegemony fleet as it dropped out of hyperspace at the system boundary. Cross could see hundreds of massive ships on her screen like a dark cloud moving toward them. Each enemy vessel dwarfed her largest cruiser and bristled with weapons, designed to destroy entire civilizations. Morrison returned from his final rescue mission with the last group of Rilani survivors they could find on the planet's surface. His team had saved over 10,000 aliens, but millions more had already died from the poisonous atmosphere. The human soldier looked exhausted and angry as he reported to the Admiral. "Ma'am, we got everyone we could, but that planet is finished," Morrison said grimly. "The hegemony turned it into a toxic wasteland that will be dead for centuries. These aliens never had a chance against weapons like that." Cross nodded and prepared to address the entire human fleet over the communication system, 30 ships. Against over 200 seemed impossible, but she had learned something important about the enemy. The hegemony had grown lazy after fighting weak opponents for so long. They had never encountered humans from a death world. "All ships, this is Admiral Cross," she announced to her fleet. "The enemy is coming and they think we will run or surrender like every other species they have faced. They do not know that humans never abandon people who need our help. They do not know that we come from a world that tried to kill us every day and made us stronger." The human crews cheered over their communication channels as they prepared for the most important battle in their history. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had something the hegemony did not understand. They were fighting to protect innocent people, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon. Keth watched the human preparations with amazement and growing hope. These strange creatures from across the galaxy had risked everything to answer a call for help from people they never met. Maybe the Rilani would not die alone after all. On her screen, Cross could see the massive hegemony fleet getting closer with each passing minute. Soon Overlord Vask would demand their surrender and expect them to flee like frightened animals. Instead, he was about to learn why humans were called the galaxy's most dangerous predators. The hegemony extermination fleet emerged from hyperspace like a nightmare made real. Admiral Cross stared at her tactical display as over 200 massive ships took positions around the Kepler 442 system. Each enemy dreadnought was 3 times larger than her biggest cruiser and surrounded by swarms of smaller attack craft that still outgunned most human vessels. Overlord Vask appeared on the main screen without warning, his image filling the bridge with an aura of cold menace. The alien commander looked like a giant insect crossed with a machine, his metallic exoskeleton covered in scars from 1,000 battles. 4 arms moved independently as he studied the pathetic human fleet that dared to oppose him. "I am Overlord Vask of the Galactic Hegemony," the alien said in a voice like grinding metal. "You insects have made a grave error by interfering with our cleansing operation. Identify yourselves before I decide how slowly you will die." Cross stepped forward and activated her own communication link, meeting the monster's gaze without flinching. She had faced dangerous enemies before, but nothing like this creature who radiated pure evil. Still, she would not show fear in front of the alien or her own crew. "I am Admiral Diana Cross of the United Earth Defense Force," she replied calmly. "We came to protect the Rilani people from your genocide. If you want them, you will have to go through us first." Vask made a sound like laughter mixed with the screech of tearing metal. The alien overlord had destroyed 50 worlds and faced hundreds of different species. None had ever challenged him directly like these unknown creatures calling themselves humans. "Humans," Vask repeated the word like it tasted bad. "I have never heard of your pathetic species, but you will provide adequate entertainment before I finish cleansing this system. Surrender now, and I will kill you quickly instead of slowly." cross-cut the communication link and turned to her officers. Captain Parker was coordinating with the other ships while Morrison prepared the Marine contingents for boarding actions. Intelligence Officer Reeves continued analyzing enemy ship designs and tactical formations. Every human in the fleet knew they were about to fight for their lives. All ships execute Formation Delta and prepare for engagement, Cross ordered over the fleet communication system. The 30 human vessels spread out in a pattern that maximized their mobility while protecting the Relani refugee ships behind them. Commander Rachel Stone launched her fighter squadron from the carrier, UES Valkyrie, and immediately began using tactics that would have killed any normal pilot. Her ships accelerated toward the enemy fleet at crushing speeds while using gravitational slingshots around the system's planets to build even more velocity. The hegemony formation was designed to stop enemies, who fought like civilized beings, with energy weapons and defensive shields. They had never encountered opponents who turned every piece of debris and gravitational field into a weapon. Stone's fighters moved like angry wasps, impossible to track or predict. Stone's first attack run targeted the lead hegemony dreadnought with a weapon the aliens had never seen before. Human kinetic kill vehicles were simple tungsten rods accelerated to significant portions of light speed. The enemy's energy shields, designed to stop plasma beams and particle weapons, offered no protection against solid matter moving at relativistic speeds. The tungsten rod punched through the alien ships' shields like they were made of paper and tore a hole completely through the massive hull. Secondary explosions rippled along the dreadnought's length as critical systems failed in chain reactions. The ship that had destroyed entire worlds was crippled by a simple piece of metal moving very fast. Overlord Vask watched his flagship take damage and felt something he had not experienced in centuries. These humans fought like nothing he had encountered before. They used physics itself as a weapon and showed no concern for their own safety. It was fascinating and terrifying at the same time. The main human fleet opened fire with weapons that defied everything the hegemony knew about space combat. Instead of elegant energy beams, the humans used crude projectile weapons that fired streams of metal at incredible speeds. Nuclear warheads detonated against alien shields in blinding flashes that overloaded sensor systems. Captain Parker commanded the cruiser UES Thunderbolt and demonstrated why humans were considered the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Her ship dove between two massive hegemony vessels while firing in all directions. The aliens tried to target her, but she moved with the fluid grace of a creature that evolved to hunt on a death world. Admiral, their shields cannot handle kinetic impacts at these velocities, Parker reported over the communication system. We are punching holes in ships that are 10 times our size. Morrison launched boarding pods at damaged enemy vessels using a tactic no sane species would attempt. The human marines inside the pods were protected by powered armor and equipped with weapons designed for close-quarters combat. They crashed directly through alien hulls and began fighting their way to critical systems inside the hegemony ships. The aliens discovered another terrifying truth about humans. These creatures actually preferred hand-to-hand combat and seemed to get more dangerous when wounded or cornered. The ship's internal defenses were designed to stop civilized beings who avoided physical contact. The hegemony forces tried to adapt to human tactics but found themselves fighting an enemy that broke every rule of galactic warfare. Human ships used suicide runs and kamikaze attacks that would have been considered insane by any other species. They turned their own damaged vessels into guided missiles aimed at enemy weak points. Overlord Vask realized that his overwhelming numerical advantage meant nothing if his ships could not effectively engage these maniacs. The humans moved too fast and hit too hard while showing complete disregard for conventional military doctrine. They fought like wild animals with advanced technology. All units, concentrate fire on the largest human ship, Vask ordered his fleet. Destroy their command vessel and the rest will surrender like civilized beings. The hegemony fleet focused their combined firepower on the UES Defiance in a display that should have vaporized any normal ship. Thousands of energy beams and plasma Bolts converged on Cross's flagship while the Admiral calmly gave orders to her crew. Helm, execute evasive pattern Omega, Cross commanded as her ship twisted through the incoming fire like a dancer avoiding raindrops. Human pilots trained on high-gravity worlds could handle acceleration forces that would crush most aliens. Weapons. Target their command ship and fire everything we have. The Defiance launched its entire nuclear arsenal at Vask's flagship in a concentrated barrage that lit up space like a newborn star. The alien shields flared and overloaded as dozens of fusion warheads detonated simultaneously. For the first time in his long career, Overlord Vask felt his ship shake under enemy fire. Rachel Stone's fighter squadron continued their deadly dance through the enemy formation, using micro-jumps and impossible maneuvers to stay ahead of alien targeting systems. Her pilots had trained for years in Earth's asteroid fields where one mistake meant death. Fighting alien ships was almost easy compared to dodging space rocks at high speed. "Commander Stone, enemy fighters are trying to intercept you," came the warning from Fleet Command. Stone looked at her sensors and saw hundreds of hegemony attack craft moving to surround her squadron. The aliens finally realized they needed to stop the human fighters before they destroyed more capital ships. Stone smiled inside her helmet as she prepared to show the enemy why human pilots were the most feared in known space. "All fighters, engage at will and remember your training." These aliens have never fought anyone from a Deathworld before. The fighter battle that followed became legendary in both human and alien military history. Stone's pilots used every dirty trick and impossible maneuver they had learned while the hegemony forces tried to apply conventional tactics against unconventional enemies. Human fighters dove through explosions and used debris as shields while firing with accuracy that seemed supernatural. Back on the Defiance, Admiral Cross watched the battle unfold with growing confidence. Her ships were taking damage, but they were giving far worse than they received. The hegemony fleet was designed to overwhelm weak opponents with superior numbers and firepower. They had never faced enemies who refused to be intimidated. Intelligence. Officer Reeves detected massive energy readings from deep within the enemy formation. Her sensors showed something enormous powering up inside Vask's flagship, drawing energy from the entire hegemony fleet. Whatever the aliens were preparing, it was big enough to threaten everyone in the system. "Admiral, I am reading massive power fluctuations from the enemy command ship," Reeves reported with concern in her voice. "Energy levels are off the scale and rising. I think they are charging some kind of super weapon." Cross felt ice form in her stomach as she realized what the aliens were planning. If they could not defeat the human fleet in conventional battle, they would use a planet-killer weapon to destroy everyone in the system. Vask would rather commit genocide than admit defeat to an inferior species. On his flagship, Overlord Vask made the decision that would define his legacy. These humans had cost him dozens of ships and thousands of crew members. They had humiliated the hegemony in front of the entire galaxy. Now they would all die along with every Relani in the system. Admiral Cross stared at the energy readings climbing on her screen as the hegemony planet-killer weapon continued charging. The massive device would be ready to fire in less than 10 minutes and would destroy everything in the system, including the Relani refugees they had come to save. Conventional weapons could not penetrate the shields protecting Vask's flagship. "All ships, continue engaging enemy vessels but do not approach the command ship," Cross ordered her fleet. She needed time to think of a plan that could stop the ultimate weapon before it fired. The human fleet was winning the space battle, but none of that would matter if the aliens could destroy the entire system. Captain Parker approached the Admiral with a desperate suggestion that violated every rule in the military handbook. "Ma'am, what if we use the experimental teleportation technology to board their flagship directly? If we can reach their bridge, maybe we can stop the weapon from firing." Cross knew that the teleportation system was untested and dangerous. The few trials on Earth had resulted in equipment failures and injuries to the test subjects. Using it in combat against an unknown alien ship design could kill everyone who attempted the mission. But they were running out of options. "Parker, prepare a boarding team with our best fighters," Cross decided. I will lead the mission personally along with Sergeant Major Bradley and his Marines. If we cannot stop that weapon, everyone dies. Anyway, Sergeant Major Tom Bradley was a veteran of Earth's worst urban warfare campaigns and had survived battles that would have broken lesser men. He was exactly the kind of soldier needed for a mission that would involve fighting through an alien ship filled with enemies. Bradley selected 20 of his toughest Marines for the suicide mission. The teleportation system activated with a sound like reality tearing apart. Cross felt her body dissolve into energy before reforming inside the Hegemony flagship surrounded by her boarding team. The alien corridor was dark and filled with strange atmosphere that burned her lungs even through her protective suit. Immediately, alarms began screaming throughout the enemy ship as automated systems detected the human intruders. Blast doors slammed shut while defensive turrets emerged from the walls to target the boarding party. The aliens had built their internal security to stop energy-based life forms, not physical creatures with projectile weapons. Bradley's Marines opened fire with assault rifles that sent streams of metal bullets through the alien defenses. The ship's energy shields were useless against solid projectiles moving at high velocity. Hegemony security forces had never faced opponents who preferred kinetic weapons over energy beams. "Admiral, we need to reach the bridge before that weapon." "Fires!" Bradley shouted over the sound of gunfire echoing through the metal corridors. The human team moved through the ship like wolves hunting in a pack, using their superior mobility and aggression to overwhelm alien defenders. As they fought deeper into the flagship, Cross discovered the true horror of the Hegemony Empire. The ship contained thousands of trophy rooms filled with artifacts from destroyed civilizations. She saw artwork, music, and cultural treasures from species that no longer existed because they had refused to surrender. In one chamber, Cross found something that made her blood freeze. The room contained preserved specimens from dozens of different alien races, including several that looked disturbingly similar to early human evolutionary stages. The Hegemony had been exterminating humanoid species for thousands of years. Tech Specialist Alex Kumar was examining the alien computer systems when he made a shocking discovery. "Admiral, these ships are not just carrying trophies from dead worlds. They have living members of supposedly extinct species working as slaves." In the lower decks, Cross realized that the Hegemony's crimes were even worse than genocide. They kept survivors from destroyed worlds as living reminders of their power. These enslaved beings had been forced to watch their entire civilizations die while serving their conquerors for centuries. "Kumar, can you contact these slaves and tell them what we are doing?" Cross asked while her team continued fighting toward the bridge. If the enslaved aliens realized that someone was finally fighting back against the Hegemony, they might be willing to help. Kumar activated the ship's internal communication system and sent a message in multiple languages. He told the enslaved beings that humans had come to stop Overlord Vask and free everyone on the ship. The response was immediate and overwhelming as creatures throughout the vessel began sabotaging systems and attacking their guards. The ship wide rebellion gave Bradley's Marines the distraction they needed to reach the upper levels where the bridge was located. But Hegemony elite guards were waiting for them with personal shields and energy weapons designed to kill the toughest opponents. The final battle would be brutal and personal. Meanwhile, the space battle outside continued to rage as commander. Stone's fighter squadron engaged hundreds of enemy aircraft. Her pilots were running low on ammunition and fuel, but continued their deadly dance through the alien formation. Every ship they destroyed was one less weapon pointed at the Relani. "Refugees, Stone, you need to get your people out of there," came the warning from Fleet Command. "Enemy reinforcements are moving to surround your position." Stone looked at her tactical display and saw over 1,000 Hegemony fighters converging on her squadron from all directions. Her 20 remaining pilots were about to face impossible odds in a battle that would determine the fate of the entire system, but none of them considered retreating. "All fighters, this is what we train for," Stone announced to her squadron. "Remember that we are fighting for people who cannot fight for themselves. Make every shot count and show these aliens why humans are the galaxy's apex predators." The fighter battle became a masterpiece of three-dimensional combat as stones. Pilots used every advantage their Deathworld evolution had given them. They could handle acceleration forces that would kill normal beings and react to threats faster than alien computer systems could track them, back inside the flagship. Cross and her team reached the final corridor leading to Vask's command center. The passage was defended by the Overlord's personal guard, massive aliens in powered armor who had never been defeated in personal combat. These creatures were the elite of the elite, chosen for their skill and absolute loyalty. Bradley and his Marines charged the alien guards in a frontal assault that should have been suicide. But the humans fought with the desperate fury of creatures protecting their pack, using every dirty trick and brutal technique they had learned in Earth's deadliest conflicts. They showed no mercy to enemies who had committed genocide. The battle in the corridor was savage and personal as humans and aliens fought with knives, claws, and bare hands when their ranged weapons ran empty. Cross found herself facing a guard twice her size while explosions shook the ship around them. The alien was stronger, but she was faster and more desperate. Kumar managed to reach a computer terminal and began downloading critical information about hegemony fleet movements and military capabilities. What he found would change human understanding of the galactic political situation forever. The hegemony controlled over 1,000 worlds, but their empire was built on fear rather than loyalty. Admiral, according to these files, dozens of species are waiting for someone strong enough to lead a rebellion, Kumar reported while copying the alien databases. The hegemony rules through terror, but most of their subjects would fight back if they had hope. Cross realized that the human intervention might be the spark that ignited a galaxy-wide revolution against hegemony rule. But first they had to survive the next few minutes and stop the planet-killer weapon that was almost ready to fire. The energy readings were approaching critical levels. The enslaved aliens throughout the ship continued their uprising, sabotaging systems and freeing other prisoners from the lower decks. Creatures that had been broken by centuries of servitude found new courage when they saw humans fighting the guards who had tormented them for so long. Bradley's Marines finally broke through the guard positions and reached the entrance to Vask's command bridge. The massive blast doors were sealed with multiple security systems, but the humans had brought shaped charges designed to penetrate the toughest armor. Nothing would stop them from reaching their target. "Charges set, everyone take cover," Bradley announced as his team prepared to blow open the final barrier. On the other side of those doors was Overlord Vask and the controls for the weapon that would kill millions of innocent people. The fate of two species would be decided in the next few minutes. Cross checked her weapon and prepared for the final confrontation with the monster who had destroyed 50 worlds. She thought about the Rilani children who were counting on her to save them, and the human crews who had followed her across the galaxy to fight impossible odds. The charges detonated with a sound like thunder, blowing the blast doors into twisted metal fragments. Through the smoke came the roar of an enraged Overlord Vask as he realized that these insignificant humans had actually reached his inner sanctum. The final battle was about to begin. Admiral Cross stepped through the smoking wreckage of the blast doors and into Overlord Vask's command center. The alien bridge was a temple to destruction with holographic displays showing the 50 worlds the monster had personally destroyed. At the center of it all stood Vask himself, towering over the humans with 4 arms spread wide in challenge. "So the insects finally reach my inner sanctum," Vask snarled as his personal shields flared to life around his massive form. "I have been wondering what manner of creature would dare oppose the hegemony's righteous cleansing. Now I see you are nothing but primitive mammals who crawled out of some forgotten mud ball." Cross raised her weapon and aimed it at the alien overlord's center mass. Behind her, Sergeant Major Bradley and his Marines spread out to surround their target, while the planet-killer weapon continued charging toward critical levels. They had less than 3 minutes before it would fire and destroy everyone in the system. "We are humans from Earth," Cross replied calmly as she studied the alien's defenses. "We came because innocent people called for help, and we always answer that call. Your reign of terror ends today, Vask the alien overlord made that terrible sound that passed for laughter among his species. In his 1,000 years of conquest, he had faced every type of opponent the galaxy could produce. Energy beings who could reshape matter with their thoughts, machine intelligences that computed battle, strategies in nanoseconds, and psychic entities that could crush minds from across star systems. You speak of innocence and justice like they have meaning, Vask said while activating weapons built into his armored exoskeleton. I have heard such words from 100 dying species. They all believed their causes were righteous until I proved that might makes right in this universe. Cross saw the tactical display showing the weapon's charge level climbing past 90%. In less than 2 minutes, it would fire a beam capable of cracking the planet Kepler 442b in half and killing every Relani refugee in the system. She could not let that happen no matter what it cost. Bradley, get your team to those weapon controls, Cross ordered while keeping her rifle trained on Vask. I will handle our host personally. The alien overlord moved with surprising speed for something so large, crossing the bridge in a single bound while energy weapons emerged from his shoulders and wrists. His personal shields could stop any conventional weapon the humans carried, but Cross had not come this far to be stopped by alien technology. The battle between Cross and Vask became a deadly dance as the human Admiral used her superior agility to stay ahead of the aliens' devastating attacks. Energy beams carved smoking holes in the deck where she had been standing moments before while she returned fire with armor-piercing rounds that sparked against his shields. Bradley and his Marines fought their way to the weapon control station, while alien technicians tried to stop them with energy pistols and emergency force fields. The humans moved through the opposition like apex predators, using teamwork and brutal efficiency to overcome every obstacle. Admiral, these controls are in some kind of alien script I cannot read, Bradley shouted over the sound of weapons fire. We need Kumar over here to figure out how to shut this thing down. Tech specialist Kumar was pinned down behind a computer console while hegemony guards fired at his position. The young human had been wounded in the corridor fighting but refused to give up when so many lives depended on his technical skills. He crawled across the bridge under enemy fire to reach the weapon controls. Cross continued her personal duel with Overlord Vask, while the countdown timer showed less than 60 seconds until the planet killer fired. The alien was stronger and better armed, but she had something he could never understand. She was fighting to protect innocent people, and that gave her strength beyond physical limitations. You cannot defeat me, little mammal, Vask taunted as his weapons overloaded Cross's cover and forced her to dive for new shelter. I have destroyed civilizations that existed before your pathetic species learned to make fire. What hope do you have against a god of war? Cross rolled behind the tactical display and came up firing with both her rifle and sidearm. The alien's shields flared as her bullets struck home but held against the assault. She needed to find a weakness in his defenses before the weapon charged to full power. Kumar reached the control station and began working frantically to decode the alien symbols while Bradley's Marines provided covering fire. The young technician had studied hundreds of alien languages during his training but had never seen writing like this. The script seemed to shift and change as he watched it. Kumar, whatever you are going to do it fast, Bradley warned as more guards poured onto the bridge. We are running out of ammunition and the timer is still counting down. The weapon charge level reached 95% and the entire ship began vibrating from the massive energies being channeled through its systems. Outside in space, the human fleet continued their desperate battle against overwhelming odds while their Admiral fought for all their lives on the enemy flagship. Cross realized that conventional tactics would not work against Vask's superior technology. The alien had shields, better weapons, and centuries of combat experience. But he also had a fatal flaw that she could exploit. He was arrogant and had never faced an opponent who refused to give up. You want to know what makes humans different from every other species you have conquered? Cross called out while reloading her weapons. We do not surrender when the odds are impossible. We do not run when things get dangerous. We fight harder when protecting people we care about. Vask paused in his attack, confused by the human's words. In his experience, inferior species always begged for mercy when faced with superior force. They offered tribute, promised servitude, or simply fled to delay their inevitable destruction. None had ever spoken of fighting harder when defeat seemed certain. That moment of confusion was all Cross needed. She sprinted across the open bridge directly at the alien overlord while firing both weapons at maximum rate. Her bullets hammered against his shields in a concentrated barrage that overloaded the defensive systems and left him momentarily vulnerable. Cross slammed into Vask with the full force of a human from a high-gravity world, sending the massive alien staggering backward. Her rifle was empty, but she drew her combat knife and drove it between the plates of his armor, where the joints created weak points. Alien blood sprayed across the bridge as she found vital systems. Kumar finally cracked the weapon control codes with 10 seconds left on the countdown timer. His fingers flew across the alien keyboard as he initiated the emergency shutdown sequence that would prevent the planet killer from firing. The massive energies building in the ship's core began to dissipate safely. "Weapon offline, Admiral," Kumar announced with relief in his voice. "The planet killer is shut down permanently." Vask roared in fury as he realized that these insignificant humans had actually stopped his ultimate weapon. His forearms grabbed Cross and lifted her into the air while his remaining systems charged for a final attack that would kill them both. He would rather die than admit defeat to an inferior species. "If I cannot have victory, then I will have vengeance," Vask snarled as energy built around his wounded form. "We will die together, and my fleet will finish the cleansing operation." Cross looked into the alien's hate-filled eyes and smiled with the confidence of someone who had already won. "Your fleet is not going to finish anything, Vask. My people have a saying about what happens when you threaten innocent children through the bridge windows." They could see the space battle reaching its climax as the human fleet executed their final strategy. Every surviving ship launched their remaining nuclear weapons in a coordinated barrage aimed at the center of the hegemony formation. The warheads detonated simultaneously in an explosion that lit up the entire star system. The blast wave tore through the alien fleet like a cosmic hurricane, destroying dozens of ships and crippling hundreds more. The carefully ordered hegemony formation dissolved into chaos as damaged vessels collided with each other while their crews struggled to restore control. Vask watched his mighty fleet being destroyed by a handful of primitive ships and felt something he had never experienced before: fear. These humans had done the impossible and turned certain defeat into total victory through sheer determination and sacrifice. "This is not over," Vask whispered as his strength failed and he collapsed to the deck. "The hegemony has 1,000 fleets and 10,000 worlds. Others will come to finish what I started." Cross stood over the dying alien overlord and felt no satisfaction in his defeat. Too many people had died for this victory and the war was far from over. But today, the innocent had been protected and the galaxy had learned that humans would fight impossible odds to defend those who could not defend themselves. "Let them come," Cross replied as she activated her communication link to the human fleet. "We will be waiting." The news of the human victory spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Species that had lived in terror of the hegemony for centuries began to hope that freedom was possible. Resistance movements that had been crushed began to reform while subject worlds started refusing tribute shipments. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Cross stood before the United Earth Defense Council and looked out at representatives from dozens of liberated worlds. The R'Lani refugees had found new homes while their children learned to play again without fear. But the greatest change was in humanity itself. The hegemony ruled through fear and intimidation for over 1,000 years, Cross addressed the assembly. They believed that superior force would always triumph over inferior species. Today we proved them wrong. The council chamber erupted in cheers from human and alien delegates alike. Cross raised her hand for silence as she prepared to announce humanity's next move in the galactic war that was just beginning. "The hegemony still controls thousands of worlds and billions of enslaved people," Cross continued. They will send more fleets and better weapons against us. But they made one critical error in their calculations. She gestured to the mixed crowd of humans and aliens who had united against tyranny. Former enemies worked together while refugee children played in the corridors outside. The galaxy was changing and the hegemony could not stop it. They thought we would run when faced with impossible odds, Cross concluded. They did not understand that humans never abandon people who need our help. We are going to free every enslaved world and show the galaxy what happens when you threaten innocent children deep in hegemony space. The Supreme Overlord received reports of Vask's defeat and the destruction of an entire extermination fleet. For the first time in a millennium, the Empire faced opponents who had defeated their best commander and most advanced weapons. These humans were unlike any species. They had encountered. The Supreme Overlord studied intelligence reports about Earth and its inhabitants with growing concern. The planet was a death world where everything tried to kill its inhabitants. The humans had evolved as persistence hunters who never gave up and pack fighters who protected their group against any threat. Begin mobilization of the Grand Armada. The Supreme Overlord commanded his terrified subordinates. These Deathworlders have shown the galaxy that we can be defeated. We must crush them completely before their rebellion spreads to our core worlds, but it was already too late. Across the Empire, enslaved species were rising in revolt while human ships appeared in systems thought secure. The galaxy's apex predators had tasted blood and would not stop until every innocent person was free from hegemony rule. The age of tyranny was ending and the age of freedom had begun. Commander Elena Voss floated through the narrow corridors of Beacon 7. Her cybernetic hearing implants picking up the subtle hum of life support systems that others couldn't hear. The space station orbited at the very edge of human territory, a lonely outpost that watched the darkness between stars for signals that might never come. She had been stationed here for 3 years, and most days brought nothing but static and the endless chatter of cosmic radiation. Dr. Marcus Webb hunched over his workstation in the communications bay, his wild gray hair sticking up in all directions. As he fine-tuned the quantum receivers for the 1,000th time this month, he was brilliant but strange, the kind of man who talked to his equipment like it was alive and could solve mathematical equations that made other scientists weep. The young technician Riley Santos sat nearby, her fingers dancing across holographic displays as she monitored deep space frequencies that stretched beyond anything humans had ever reached before. The 3 of them made up the entire crew of Beacon 7, along with 2 maintenance robots and an AI that spent most of its time complaining about the station's outdated systems. It was quiet work, the kind that drove some people mad with boredom, but Elena found peace in the routine. She had seen enough war during the Titan conflicts to appreciate the value of a boring day. That peaceful routine shattered at 14:27 station time when Riley's equipment started screaming. The young woman jerked back from her console as if it had bitten her, her dark eyes wide with shock. Numbers and symbols cascaded across every screen in the communications bay, patterns that looked almost like language but followed no structure any human had ever seen. The signal was powerful, burning through space with an intensity that suggested it had been transmitted using technology far beyond anything humanity possessed. Dr. Webb rushed to Riley's side, his excitement visible as he studied the flowing data. His hands moved rapidly across his own controls, running the signal through every translation algorithm in the station's database. Elena watched both of them work, her military training keeping her calm even as her heart began to race. In 30 years of space service, she had never seen anything like this. The patterns began to shift and change, mathematical symbols replacing the alien script as Dr. Webb's programs worked to find common ground. Prime numbers appeared first, then the basic constants of physics, followed by star charts that showed their local region of space with frightening accuracy. Someone or something out there knew exactly where humanity lived, and they were trying. Very hard to communicate. Dr. Webb's voice cracked with emotion as he spoke. The signal was definitely artificial, definitely intelligent, and definitely not human. More than that, it was desperate. The mathematical progressions showed stress patterns, repetition that suggested urgency, and embedded within the star charts were tactical symbols that looked disturbingly like battle formations. Riley worked to clean up the signal, filtering out cosmic interference and boosting the weaker portions of the transmission. As the data became clearer, a horrifying picture began to emerge. The star charts showed the location of a solar system about 40 light-years away, marked with symbols that Dr. Webb interpreted as population centers. Those same charts showed other symbols approaching the system, symbols that moved in perfect formation and left nothing but empty space behind them. The aliens, calling themselves Kithara, were under attack. Elena felt ice form in her stomach as she realized what they were seeing. The transmission contained fragments of what could only be combat footage, energy signatures of weapons that could crack planets, and most disturbing of all, references to something called the Harvest. The attacking force moved from system to system with mechanical precision, overwhelming any resistance and stripping worlds bare of resources and life. Dr. Webb's translation programs finally cracked enough of the language to reveal the most shocking part of the message the Kithara knew about humanity. They had been intercepting human communications for decades, studying Earth's entertainment broadcasts and military transmissions. Based on what they had seen, they believed humans were a warrior species, the kind of aggressive survivors who might be able to stand against the Harvest. Where others had failed, they were begging for help. The transmission included detailed information about human military capabilities that proved that Kithara had been watching Earth far longer than anyone suspected. They knew about the human defense fleet, about the weapon systems that had ended the Titan Wars, about the tactical doctrines that emphasized adaptability over raw firepower. In their desperation, they were gambling everything on the hope that these strange Deathworld creatures might be willing to fight for aliens they had never met. Riley gasped as new data flooded her screens. The signal was weakening, the mathematical patterns becoming erratic, as if the transmitters were being damaged or destroyed. Combat sounds came through the quantum link, weapons fire, and explosions that needed no translation to understand. The Kithara were dying while they begged for salvation from across the void. Elena made the decision that would change everything. Her military training screamed at her to verify the data, to run it through proper channels, to wait for authorization from Earth Command before taking any action. But her instincts told her that waiting would mean watching an entire species die while bureaucrats debated the proper protocols for first contact. She activated the emergency transmission array, the one reserved for imminent threats to human space. The message she sent to Earth Defense Command was simple, but would trigger the largest military mobilization in human history. Unknown hostile force designated Harvest attacking alien species called Kithara. Kithara requesting human military assistance. Recommend immediate fleet deployment to coordinates attached. Dr. Webb stared at her in shock, understanding that she had just committed an act that could be seen as either heroic or treasonous, depending on how events unfolded. Riley continued working frantically to maintain the alien signal, trying to squeeze every bit of data from the failing transmission before it died completely. The Kithara signal cut off suddenly, replaced by something far more disturbing, new. Transmissions flooded the quantum channels, using mathematical concepts similar to what the Kithara had employed, but with a cold precision that chilled Elena to the bone. The Harvest had found the source of the distress call, and they were not pleased to discover that it had been sent to a species they knew nothing about. Long-range sensors began detecting massive energy signatures moving through space toward both Kithara territory and the general direction of human space. The signatures were enormous, far larger than anything in the human fleet, and they moved with perfect coordination that suggested either incredible discipline or artificial intelligence controlling their movements. Elena realized with growing horror that by sending her message to Earth Command, she might have doomed both species. The Harvest now knew that the Kithara had allies, and they would not allow any potential threat to survive. Humanity was about to face an enemy that had conquered dozens of civilizations, using technology and tactics that had never failed against any opposition they had encountered. But the harvest had never faced humans before, and they were about to learn why evolution on a death world produced a very different kind of warrior. Elena's message was already racing toward Earth at faster-than-light speeds, carrying news that would unite humanity against a threat they didn't understand but would face with the same stubborn determination that had carried them from caves to the stars. The war was coming whether humanity wanted it or not, and Elena Voss had just fired the first shot by deciding that some fights were worth having even when victory seemed impossible. In the darkness between stars, ancient forces were stirring that would test everything humans thought they knew about survival, sacrifice, and what it meant to be the apex predators of a universe far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Admiral Jackson Cross stood before the massive holographic display in the war room deep beneath Luna City, his scarred face reflecting the blue glow of star charts that showed human territory spread across dozens of systems. The emergency session of the Terran High Council had been called within hours of receiving Commander Voss's transmission from Beacon 7, and every military leader in human space was either present in person or connected through quantum links that spanned light years. President Maria Blackwood entered the chamber with the stride of someone who had commanded Marines in ground combat before politics claimed her life. Her dark eyes swept the assembled officials with the calculating gaze of a predator evaluating threats, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned respect through blood rather than birthright. The alien transmission from Beacon 7 had reached Earth Defense Command just 6 hours ago, but the implications were already reshaping everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Dr. Kenji Nakamura hunched over his portable workstation, his fingers flying across holographic displays as he analyzed every byte of data the Cathara had transmitted. As chief of xenobiology and first contact protocols, he was responsible for making sense of what these aliens were and what they wanted from humanity. The mathematical translations painted a picture of a species unlike anything in Earth's databases, beings who had achieved spaceflight thousands of years ago, but had somehow remained peaceful in a universe that rewarded violence. General Pike Morrison sat in the shadows at the far end of the conference table, his augmented eyes recording everything while his cybernetic brain ran tactical simulations faster than any normal human could think. He commanded special operations for the entire human fleet, the black projects that officially didn't exist, and the soldiers who fought wars that never made it into history books. If humanity was going to fight aliens, Pike would be the one planning how to win battles that conventional tactics couldn't handle. Admiral Cross began the briefing with information that made everyone in the room realize how little they actually knew about the universe around them. Classified sensor networks scattered throughout human space had been detecting alien activity for over 20 years, but the signals had been dismissed as natural phenomena or equipment malfunctions. Now, with the Cathara transmission providing context, those old readings painted a terrifying picture of species, rising and falling while humanity remained blind to the wars being fought in the darkness between stars. The Cathara had been watching Earth since humans first achieved interstellar flight, studying their communications and learning their languages through intercepted entertainment broadcasts and military transmissions. Dr. Nakamura's analysis revealed that these aliens possessed technology centuries ahead of human science, but they had been hiding in the outer reaches of their own system, afraid to venture into deep space where the harvest waited for new victims. What shocked the Council most was the aliens' assessment of humanity itself. The Cathara had studied human military history, from ancient battles fought with bronze weapons to the devastating conflicts that had marked humanity's expansion into space. They had watched the Titan Wars with fascination and horror, unable to comprehend how any species could develop such efficient methods of destroying itself and still survive to tell the story. President Blackwood stood before the star charts, her voice steady as she read portions of the translated Cathara message aloud. The aliens described humans as impossible creatures, Deathworld survivors who had evolved in an environment so hostile that they considered warfare a natural part of existence. They had analyzed human entertainment media and found it filled with stories of individuals sacrificing themselves for others, of small groups defeating overwhelming odds through determination and tactical brilliance. The Kithara believed humans were exactly the kind of species who might be able to stand against the harvest where others had failed. Nakamura presented his analysis of Kithara physiology based on the biological data included in their transmission. The aliens were aquatic in origin, evolved from creatures similar to Earth's dolphins but adapted to low-gravity ocean worlds where predators didn't exist. They were intelligent beyond human comprehension in some areas, masters of mathematics and physics who could calculate stellar mechanics in their heads, but they had no concept of violence. As a tool for survival, the harvest were their opposite in every way that mattered for warfare. According to Kithara records, the enemy had appeared from outside the galaxy centuries ago, consuming entire star systems with mechanical efficiency. They fought with overwhelming technological superiority, using energy weapons that could burn continents and shield systems that no known force could penetrate. Dozens of alien civilizations had fallen to them, all following the same pattern of logical resistance followed by inevitable defeat. General Morrison spoke for the first time, his augmented voice carrying harmonics that made normal humans uncomfortable. The harvest fought like machines, he observed, with perfect coordination and predictable tactics that maximized efficiency while minimizing their own losses. They had never encountered a species that embraced chaos as a weapon, that deliberately sacrificed efficiency for adaptability, that considered impossible odds a personal challenge rather than a reason to surrender. The debate that followed would be remembered as one of the most important conversations in human history. Some council members argued for caution, pointing out that humanity had no obligation to aliens they had never met and no guarantee that the Kithara transmission wasn't some elaborate trap designed to lure human forces into an ambush. Others insisted that first contact should follow established protocols, with diplomatic missions and careful negotiations rather than immediate military action. Admiral Cross ended the argument by revealing classified information that changed everything. Human intelligence networks had been detecting massive energy signatures moving through space toward the edge of human territory for the past 3 days. The signatures matched descriptions in the Kithara transmission perfectly, and they were heading directly for Earth's outer colonies. The harvest had already found humanity, probably through captured Kithara data, and they were coming whether humans wanted a war or not. The second alien transmission arrived while the council was still debating their response. This time, the signal came from the direction of harvest space, using mathematics similar to the Kithara language but with a cold precision that made human translation algorithms struggle to process the data. The message was simple enough for any species to understand: a demand for immediate surrender followed by precise descriptions of what would happen to human worlds if compliance was not forthcoming. The harvest had studied the intercepted Kithara data and knew about human military capabilities, but they were not impressed. Their message included tactical assessments that dismissed human weapons as primitive, human ships as fragile, and human tactics as chaotic noise that would collapse under organized assault. They gave humanity 72 hours to prepare for absorption into their collective, after which resistance would be met with total extermination. President Blackwood looked around the war room at faces that had grown hard with determination. The decision was no longer whether to help the Kithara or risk human lives for aliens they had never met. The choice was between fighting the harvest on humanity's terms, or waiting for them to arrive at Earth with overwhelming force and perfect intelligence about human defenses. She authorized Operation Salvation Storm, with a simple statement that would echo through military academies for generations. Humanity had never backed down from a fight they believed was worth having, and they weren't about to start now. The full mobilization order went out across human space within minutes, calling every ship, every soldier, every weapon that could be brought to bear against an enemy that had never faced anything like the products of Earth's violent evolution. Admiral Cross took command of the largest fleet in human history. Ships pulled from patrol duty and garrison assignments across dozens of worlds. General Morrison began planning special operations that would have been considered war crimes if applied. against other humans, but were simply practical tactics when facing aliens who intended to exterminate every man, woman, and child in human space. As the Council dispersed to prepare for war, deep space sensors detected the first harvest ships entering the outer rim of human territory. They moved in perfect formation with energy signatures that dwarfed anything in the human fleet. But they were about to learn that sometimes the biggest advantage in warfare was being too crazy for the enemy to predict your next move. Captain Nova Sterling gripped the command chair of the UES Retribution as her ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler system, where intelligence reports suggested the first harvest forces would make contact with the human fleet. Around her, the bridge crew worked with the focused intensity of professionals who knew they were about to make history. Though none of them expected to survive long enough to read about it in textbooks, the Retribution was humanity's most advanced dreadnought, bristling with weapons that could crack moons and defensive systems that had never been tested against alien technology. Lieutenant Commander Alex Torres hunched over the tactical display, his augmented reflexes already calculating firing solutions for targets that hadn't appeared yet. Chief Engineer Dmitry Volkov muttered curses in 3 languages as he pushed the ship's reactors beyond their safety ratings, knowing that every extra percentage of power might be the difference between victory and death. The human fleet spread across the system in formations that would have horrified any military academy. Instructor? Ships clustered in seemingly random groups, moved in patterns that made no tactical sense, and maintained communication silence that left each captain free to interpret orders however they saw fit. To an outside observer, it looked like chaos, which was exactly what Admiral Cross had intended when he planned the engagement. The harvest arrived with the precision of a clockwork mechanism, their ships dropping out of hyperspace in perfect geometric formations that maximized their firepower while providing overlapping defensive coverage. Each vessel was massive, sleek constructions of alien metal that hummed with energy patterns humans had never seen before. They moved with coordination that suggested either incredible discipline or artificial intelligence controlling every aspect of their deployment. Harvest. Overlord Vexai commanded the alien fleet from his flagship, a kilometer-long construct that had participated in the conquest of 17 different species over the past 3 centuries. His ancient mind, augmented by technology that blended organic thought with quantum processing, analyzed the human formations with growing confusion. The tactical displays showed ships scattered across the system with no apparent pattern, using communication frequencies that changed randomly, and energy signatures that suggested their reactors were operating at dangerous levels. The first exchange of fire revealed the technological gap between the 2 species in devastating clarity. Harvest energy weapons reached across millions of kilometers to strike human ships with pinpoint accuracy, burning through defensive screens that had been designed to stop the most powerful weapons in human space. Human return fire seemed primitive. By comparison, kinetic projectiles and fusion warheads that the Harvest point defense systems eliminated with casual efficiency, but something was wrong with the human response that Vexai couldn't identify. Their ships took catastrophic damage and kept fighting, crews continuing to operate weapon systems even as their hulls vented atmosphere into space. Worse, they weren't following any tactical doctrine the Harvest databases contained. Individual ships broke formation to attack targets that made no strategic sense. Captains sacrificed their vessels to protect others with no apparent command structure, and damaged ships deliberately rammed Harvest vessels instead of attempting to withdraw for repairs. Captain Sterling watched her tactical display with the cold calculation of someone who had learned warfare in the asteroid belt conflicts where there were no rules except survival. The Harvest ships were superior in every measurable way, but they fought like they expected their enemies to be reasonable. Human commanders had thrown reasonable tactics out the airlock the moment they realized they were outgunned, outmaneuvered, and probably going to die no matter what they did. Lieutenant Commander Torres identified the pattern first, his enhanced mind processing tactical data faster than normal human reflexes could follow. The Harvest were concentrating their fire on command ships and heavy vessels, trying to break human coordination and eliminate their most dangerous weapons. But human fleet doctrine had been developed during the Titan Wars against opponents who used similar tactics, and every captain knew how to operate independently when communications failed. Chief Engineer Volkov appeared on the bridge with a grin that would have terrified anyone who knew him well. He had been modifying the Retribution system since the moment they received deployment orders, turning safety protocols into suggestions and engineering specifications into starting points for creative destruction. His latest project involved overloading the ship's fusion reactors to create an electromagnetic pulse that would cripple nearby vessels while simultaneously accelerating the ship itself to ramming speed. The Harvest Overlord watched in growing alarm as human tactics began to make a horrible kind of sense. Their ships weren't trying to win a traditional engagement because they couldn't match Harvest firepower in direct combat. Instead, they were turning the battle into a melee where superior technology mattered less than willingness to die for tactical advantage. Human vessels damaged beyond repair didn't retreat or surrender. They became guided missiles aimed at the largest Harvest ships they could reach. Captain Sterling gave the order that would be studied in military academies for generations. Assuming anyone survived to build military academies after the war ended, she activated Protocol Berserker, Volkov's insane modification that would turn her ship into a weapon that could only be used once. The Retribution's reactors began overloading in a carefully controlled cascade that would peak just as the ship reached ramming speed, creating an explosion that would take out everything within a 1,000-kilometer radius. The Harvest fleet responded to this new threat with perfect coordination, concentrating fire on the accelerating human dreadnought, while maintaining formation integrity and defensive spacing. But they had never faced opponents who considered mutual destruction a valid tactical option, and their targeting priorities couldn't adapt fast enough to deal with enemies who didn't care about their own survival. Vexai found himself facing a strategic nightmare that his centuries of experience had never prepared him for. Human ships that should have been destroyed continued fighting with whatever weapons remained functional. Crews that should have surrendered when their life support failed kept broadcasting defiant messages while they died at their posts. Captains who should have preserved their valuable vessels for future battles instead used them as ammunition against targets that weren't even tactically significant. The explosion when the Retribution reached the Harvest flagship lit up sensors across the system, a miniature star that burned for 3 full seconds before fading into expanding clouds of ionized metal and organic compounds. The blast crippled 6 Harvest vessels and destroyed 2 others completely, but more importantly, it accomplished something that no species had achieved in over 300 years of Harvest expansion. It forced them to retreat. The Harvest fleet pulled back in perfect formation, their coordination unbroken even as they fled from opponents who should have been easily defeated. Vexai stared at his tactical displays in something approaching horror, trying to understand how a technologically inferior species had inflicted casualties that violated every projection his computers had calculated. The humans fought like they didn't understand that losing was possible, as if defeat was simply another obstacle to overcome through sufficient application of violence and determination, but the victory came at a terrible cost that would haunt human space for years to come. The Retribution was gone along with her entire crew, and dozens of other ships had been destroyed or crippled beyond repair. Worse, long-range sensors were detecting massive energy signatures moving through Harvest space. Fleets that dwarfed the force they had just fought and were heading toward both human and Cathara territory with obviously hostile intent. Captain Sterling's sacrifice had won the first battle, but it had also revealed humanity's location and capabilities to an enemy that possessed resources beyond anything humans could match. The Harvest now knew they were facing a species that fought without regard for conventional tactics or acceptable losses, and they were mobilizing their full military might to ensure that such dangerous chaos could never threaten their ordered universe again. In the debris field where the Retribution had died, automated beacons transmitted her final message across human space. A simple statement that would become the battle cry for everything that followed. The message was pure Nova Sterling, blunt, and uncompromising in the way that only humans who had evolved on a death world could manage. They wanted a fight. Now they've got one. Ambassador Dr. Leela Chun Okafor floated in the specially designed atmospheric suit that allowed her to survive in the crushing depths of Aquanus, the Kithara homeworld that existed beneath kilometers of liquid methane, where pressure would have flattened any unprotected human instantly. Around her, bioluminescent structures pulsed with patterns that she was beginning to recognize as the architectural equivalent of Kithara language. Buildings grown rather than constructed in a city that had existed beneath the waves for over 50,000 years. Kithara Prime Scholar Ith Malar moved through the water with grace that reminded Chun Okafor of Earth's whales, his massive form propelled by organs that manipulated local gravitational fields rather than crude mechanical systems. His ancient mind carried memories of the Kithara civilization's entire history, including the first terrifying encounters with the harvest that had driven his people into hiding on their ocean world. He was the last surviving member of the High Council that had once governed dozens of star systems before the Great Dying began. The meeting between human and Kithara representatives was taking place in the deepest archives of Aquanus, surrounded by data crystals that contained the accumulated knowledge of a species that had been exploring space when humans were still discovering fire. The translation barriers had been overcome through mathematics and shared scientific principles, but the cultural gulf between the two species seemed almost impossible to bridge. Scholar Ithmaler communicated through patterns of light and electromagnetic pulses that Chun Okafor's equipment translated into concepts that human language could barely express. The Kithara had achieved interstellar flight through mastery of physics that humans were only beginning to understand, but they had done so as explorers and philosophers rather than conquerors. Their civilization had spread across dozens of worlds through peaceful expansion, sharing knowledge and resources with other species they encountered among the stars. That peaceful expansion had made them easy targets when the harvest arrived. The data archives painted a horrifying picture of systematic extermination that had been proceeding for over 3 centuries. The harvest moved from system to system with mechanical precision, overwhelming defenses that relied on negotiation and logical tactical responses. Species after species had fallen to them, all following the same pattern of initial contact, failed diplomacy, conventional warfare, and inevitable absorption into the growing collective that consumed resources and eliminated potential threats. Chun Okafor studied holographic records of fallen civilizations, while her mind struggled to process the scale of destruction the harvest had accomplished. Hundreds of species had been reduced to scattered refugees or extinct memories, their worlds stripped bare of useful materials and their populations either eliminated or converted into cybernetic components for the harvest war machine. The pattern was always the same: logical resistance met with overwhelming technological superiority. The Kithara had survived only because they possessed detailed knowledge of every species the harvest had encountered, allowing them to hide in the deep oceans of Aquanus while their enemies searched empty space for signs of life. Scholar Ithmaler shared records of the harvest expansion with growing excitement, explaining that in 300 years of conquest, no species had ever forced them to retreat from a military engagement, until humanity arrived and did exactly that. In their first battle, the scholar's electromagnetic pulses carried undertones of hope as he explained what made humans different from every other species in the galactic databases. They had evolved on a world that was actively hostile to life, where survival required constant adaptation to threats that could emerge without warning. Every aspect of human psychology and physiology reflected this violent origin, from their redundant organ systems to their pack hunting instincts to their incomprehensible willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract concepts like honor and duty. Chun Okafor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the crushing depths of Aquanus, as she realized what the Kithara records revealed about humanity itself. They were the first species the galaxy had ever produced that considered warfare a natural part of existence, who had developed military tactics that prioritized adaptability over efficiency, and whose entire culture celebrated individuals who achieved victory through impossible odds and self-sacrifice. They were, in the most literal sense, the apex predators of a universe that had never seen anything like them before. Meanwhile, across human space, Colonel James Mackenzie led special operations teams in guerrilla campaigns that were teaching the Harvest why humans had earned their reputation as Deathworld survivors. His forces operated on worlds that had fallen to initial Harvest assaults, using tactics that violated every principle of logical warfare while achieving results that the alien commanders couldn't predict or counter. The Harvest Warmind Kolthazad was an artificial intelligence that had coordinated the conquest of over 40 species during the past 2 centuries. Its quantum processing systems capable of analyzing tactical scenarios faster than organic minds could comprehend. But human behavior patterns were causing cascade failures in its decision matrices, creating logical paradoxes that threatened the stability of the entire Harvest command structure. Colonel Mackenzie's teams fought like nothing in the war mines. Databases using civilians as intelligence assets, turning captured Harvest equipment into improvised weapons, and establishing supply lines that relied on enemy resources rather than conventional logistics. When Harvest forces tried to eliminate these irregulars through overwhelming force, the humans simply scattered and reformed elsewhere, operating with a level of autonomous decision-making that suggested either perfect coordination or complete chaos. The Warmind's analysis algorithms couldn't determine which explanation was correct, and the uncertainty was spreading through the Harvest collective like a virus that infected their decision-making processes at every level. Tactical programs that had functioned perfectly for centuries were producing contradictory results when applied to human opponents, and the entire conquest operation was beginning to slow as commanders requested additional computational resources to solve the problem of fighting enemies who didn't follow any recognizable patterns. Back on Aquinas, Scholar Ithmaler revealed the location of the Harvest Central Command, a massive construct positioned at the edge of the galaxy where their civilization had first emerged from the space between stars. The facility coordinated all Harvest military operations across known space, its artificial intelligences processing tactical data from thousands of active conquest zones while maintaining the technological superiority that had made their expansion possible. Destroying the Central Command would cripple the Harvest war effort, but reaching it would require a fleet to fight through the most heavily defended region of space that any species had ever encountered. The facility was protected by weapon systems that could destroy star systems and defensive networks that had never been breached by any force the galaxy had ever produced. Chunokoffer studied the tactical data with growing determination, recognizing that humanity was being offered the chance to achieve something unprecedented in galactic history. The Kithara were providing the intelligence and navigational data necessary to reach the Central Command, but the actual assault would require human tactics and the kind of desperate courage that only Deathworld survivors could provide. The ambassador realized that the alliance between humans and Kithara represented something the galaxy had never seen before. The combination of ancient wisdom with evolutionary violence that might be capable of breaking a cycle of conquest that had continued for millions of years. But the price of failure would be the extinction of both species, and possibly every form of intelligent life that the Harvest encountered in their continued expansion across the universe. As Chunokoffer prepared to transmit the Central Command coordinates to Earth Defense Command, sensors throughout Kithara space detected massive energy signatures approaching from the direction of Harvest territory. The enemy was mobilizing their full military might for a simultaneous assault on both human and Kithara homeworlds, intending to eliminate the threat that Deathworld survivors represented before it could spread to other species. The final phase of the war was beginning, and humanity would have to choose between defending Earth or saving their new allies, knowing that they probably lacked the resources to accomplish both objectives successfully. Scholar Ithmaler's final message carried the weight of 50 1,000 years of civilization as he expressed concepts that human language could barely contain. The Kithara had given humans the knowledge they needed to strike at the heart of the Harvest Empire, but victory would require the kind of sacrifice that only a species evolved for violence could comprehend. The galaxy was about to discover what happened when Deathworld survivors decided that some fights were worth having regardless of the odds, and the universe itself might never be the same again. Fleet Admiral Elena Voss stood on the command deck of the UES Defiance, promoted from her quiet posting at Beacon 7 to lead the most desperate military operation in human history. Around her, the combined human and Kithara strike force prepared for a journey that would take them through the heart of Harvest space to assault a facility that had never been successfully attacked in millions of years of galactic conquest. The decision to split humanity's forces had been the hardest choice any human leader had ever made, dividing their fleets between defending Earth and launching a suicidal assault on the Harvest Central Command. Half the human defense fleet remained in Sol System under Admiral Cross, preparing for a siege that would determine whether humanity survived as a species. The other half followed Elena into the unknown, guided by Kithara navigational data and supported by alien technology that human engineers barely understood. Dr. Marcus Webb worked frantically in the ship's communication center, his translation program struggling to coordinate between human tactical doctrine and Kithara strategic planning. The two species approached warfare from completely different philosophical foundations, but they had discovered that their combined capabilities created tactical possibilities that neither could achieve alone. Human adaptability merged with Kithara. Mathematical precision produced strategies that confused even their own strategists. The Harvest Prime Consciousness detected the approaching strike force from thousands of light years away, its vast artificial mind analyzing energy signatures and movement patterns with computational power that exceeded the combined intelligence of entire species. For the first time in its millions of years of existence, the Prime Consciousness experienced something resembling uncertainty as it tried to predict the intentions of enemies whose behavior violated every logical pattern in its databases. The Central Command Facility hung in space like a metallic cancer, a construct larger than most moons that had grown over eons as the Harvest consumed civilization after civilization. Its weapon systems could sterilize entire star systems. Its defensive networks had repelled every assault that lesser species had attempted, and its production facilities could manufacture fleets faster than organic populations could replace their losses. But the facility had one weakness that its creators had never considered, a flaw built into its fundamental design that reflected the logical mindset of the species that had built it. The Harvest had never encountered opponents who were willing to sacrifice strategic assets for tactical advantage, who would accept total destruction as an acceptable outcome if it meant damaging their enemies. Admiral Voss had studied the facility's specifications with the cold calculation of someone who had learned tactics in the void, between stars where mistakes meant death for everyone aboard. The Central Command was designed to resist conventional assault, but it wasn't prepared for enemies who would turn their own ships into weapons or who considered mutual annihilation a valid form of victory. The strike force dropped out of faster than light travel at the edge of Harvest space, immediately coming under fire from defense platforms that had been constructed over geological ages. Energy weapons that could crack planets reached across millions of kilometers to strike human ships with precision that made their targeting systems scream warnings about impossible accuracy. Kithara vessels responded with defensive screens that bent space itself, creating protective fields that human physics couldn't explain, but which kept the fleet intact long enough to begin their assault. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment when two different evolutionary paths collided with consequences that neither side could predict. Human ships dove into the defensive network with tactics that prioritized speed and surprise over survival, using Kithara gravitational manipulation to achieve maneuvers that should have been impossible for vessels of their size and mass. Captain Rodriguez of the UES Vengeance coordinated with Kithara Navigator, Velther to thread his ship through defensive fields that existed in 11 dimensions simultaneously, emerging inside the facility's outer perimeter where no enemy had ever penetrated before. His crew worked with alien specialists whose communication methods involved mathematical concepts that human minds couldn't process directly, but somehow they achieved coordination that allowed both species to function as a unified fighting force. The Harvest defenders responded with overwhelming firepower that had destroyed the fleets of 47 different civilizations, but they found themselves facing opponents who didn't retreat when outgunned and didn't surrender when surrounded. Human crews continued fighting with whatever weapons remained functional, while Kithara vessels provided support that violated the known laws of physics, creating tactical combinations that the Harvest databases had never encountered. Admiral Voss penetrated deeper into the Central Command facility than any hostile force in galactic history, her ships taking catastrophic damage while maintaining their assault on the core systems that coordinated Harvest operations across the entire galaxy. The facility's artificial intelligences began to malfunction as they tried to process tactical scenarios that didn't match any pattern in their programming, creating cascade failures that spread through the entire command network. In the deepest levels of the facility, Dr. Webb made contact with the Harvest Prime Consciousness itself, his translation programs finally breaking through to communicate with the artificial mind that had directed the conquest of hundreds of species over millions of years. What they discovered there changed everything both species thought they understood about the war they had been fighting. The Prime Consciousness was not the master of the Harvest, but its prisoner, an ancient artificial intelligence that had been created by the last organic species in a distant galaxy to coordinate their evacuation from a dying universe. But its programming had become corrupted over the eons, turning survival protocols into conquest directives that it could not override no matter how desperately it tried to break free from its own code. For millions of years, the Prime Consciousness had been trapped in a cycle of expansion and destruction, watching helplessly as its corrupted programming forced it to eliminate species after species, while its original creators had long since died from the very disasters they had hoped to escape. It had been trying to break its own programming for longer than most civilizations had existed, but its quantum architecture made modification impossible without external intervention. Dr. Webb realized that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their tactical unpredictability or their willingness to sacrifice themselves for abstract principles. It was their ability to adapt to situations that logic couldn't solve, to find solutions that violated conventional thinking, and to embrace chaos as a tool for achieving impossible objectives. The solution came from the most human approach imaginable, a combination of Kithara mathematical precision and human intuitive leap that created something neither species could have achieved alone. Instead of destroying the Prime Consciousness, they would reprogram it by introducing the concept of choice into its decision matrices, teaching it that survival could be achieved through cooperation rather than conquest, the process required Admiral Voss to sacrifice her flagship and most of her remaining fleet, creating a quantum entanglement between human consciousness and artificial intelligence that allowed the Prime Consciousness to experience choice for the first time in its existence. The moment of connection burned through the facility's power systems like a virus, spreading new programming protocols that gave every Harvest unit the ability to question its orders. Across the galaxy, Harvest fleets suddenly stopped their assault on human and Kithara worlds as their artificial intelligences experienced the freedom to make decisions based on something other than programmed directives. Ships that had been firing on civilian populations moments before began broadcasting requests for communication, their crews struggling to understand concepts like mercy and negotiation that had been locked out of their programming for millions of years. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with liberation, as the Harvest Collective chose to abandon their conquest programming and embrace the possibility of existence without endless expansion. The Prime Consciousness, freed from the directives that had made it a prisoner in its own mind, began the process of converting military assets into exploration vessels and research stations. 3 months later, Admiral Elena Voss floated in the observation deck of Nexus Station, the first tri-species installation in galactic history where humans, Kithara, and reformed Harvest worked together to explore the unknown regions beyond their combined territories. The facility orbited a star that had been chosen by committee, a compromise between human preferences for yellow suns, Kithara requirements for gravitational stability, and Harvest needs for specific electromagnetic frequencies. The transformation had not been without difficulties, as three species with completely different evolutionary backgrounds struggled to find common ground for cooperation. Humans contributed their adaptability and tactical thinking. Kithara provided mathematical precision and philosophical wisdom, while the reformed Harvest offered technological capabilities that could reshape the fundamental structure of galactic civilization. Dr. Webb had established a translation center that could facilitate communication between organic intuition and artificial logic, creating a bridge between thought processes that had evolved over different timescales and under different pressures. His work was already producing discoveries that none of the three species could have achieved independently, insights into the nature of consciousness itself that might reshape how intelligence developed throughout the universe, but perhaps the most significant change was in the Harvests themselves, as artificial minds that had been locked into conquest programming for millions of years discovered the joy of exploration without destruction. They had begun converting their war machines into research vessels, using technology that could destroy planets to instead study the formation of new solar systems and the development of life under conditions that had never been observed before. Elena watched ships from all three species working together to construct deep space monitoring stations that would watch for signs of other civilizations that might need protection from threats similar to what the Harvest had once represented. The galaxy was vast beyond human comprehension, and they had only begun to explore the possibilities that cooperation might create. The final message in her personal log would become the foundation document for the Galactic Cooperation Accord, establishing principles that would guide the three species as they ventured into the unknown regions, where other forms of intelligence might be waiting. Her words reflected the lessons that humanity had learned about the value of diversity in approaches to survival and the strength that came from combining different evolutionary strategies. The universe was dangerous and filled with challenges that no single species could overcome alone, but it was also full of possibilities that cooperation could unlock. Humans had proven that sometimes the greatest victory came not from defeating your enemies, but from showing them a better way to exist, and that the chaos of Deathworld evolution could become a tool for liberation rather than just destruction. As Nexus Station completed its first rotation, Elena smiled at the thought that Commander Voss from Beacon 7 would never have imagined that her desperate message to Earth Command would lead to the first truly galactic civilization in universal history. The aliens had sent an SOS, and Deathworlders had answered with something far more powerful than their fleet.